I'm so glad that you decided to be part of this 6-week small group study, Why Jesus? If we want to be followers of Jesus, we need to let go of some of the misconceptions that we have about him. And in the next 6 weeks, we'll be going through various studies, various stories that are in the New Testament that help us to get a clearer picture of who Jesus was, why he came, and why then we should follow his teachings. Throughout the years, people have used the image of Jesus to push forward their own agenda. In fact, there was a movie in 2001 called A Knight's Tale, and they told about this incident in the 1300s during a war between the French and English when they were fighting over where the Pope should reside. In fact, there were 2 popes at the time. And the English were shouting out in this movie, the Pope is French, but Jesus Christ is English. Just a ridiculous statement, something that you would expect in a Monty Python movie. But in reality, it's a historical statement, something that the English actually said at that time. We take on Jesus Christ as some sort of banner holder for our own agendas. This was really clear in a couple stories that Philip Yancey shares in his book, The Jesus I Never Knew. This is a book that we're going to be using a lot during this study to help guide us through these various stories. And he tells the story of 2 professional athletes that are writing about Jesus. One of them was a former Miami Dolphin offensive lineman. And he writes, I guarantee you, Christ would be the toughest guy who ever played the game. If he were alive today, I would picture a 6'6", 260-pound defensive tackle who would always make the big plays and would be really hard to keep out of the backfield for offensive linemen like myself. Jesus as a football player. Or else you can have Jesus as a baseball player. A former New York Yankee wrote this, I firmly believe that if Jesus Christ was sliding into second base, he would knock the second baseman into left field to break up the double play. Christ might not throw a spitball, but he would play hard within the rules. It's really kind of humorous, right? The way that people picture Christ as the best image of themselves that they can imagine, and they want to attribute to Christ the things that they value. Yancey talks about a class that he led for many years on Jesus, and he would give various images of Jesus to the class and various portrayals of Jesus in movies. And then he'd ask, how do you picture Jesus? Like over 90% of the people, almost everybody, said that they pictured Jesus as being tall, which is really, really unlikely for someone who was born in the 1st century AD, a Jewish man. It's really unlikely. And most of them said Jesus was handsome. The little bit that we know from the Old Testament that talks about the suffering servant talks about someone who was not handsome. And then he occasionally would show an image from a BBC movie that had Jesus who was kind of pudgy, overweight. And people found this offensive. We live in a society that idolizes fitness. And so they found it offensive to think about following a Jesus who was overweight. The images that we have of Jesus sometimes say more about us as people than they do about Jesus. We want to follow the best. We want to follow the greatest, the most handsome, the tallest, the one that everybody else would be following. And so we remake Jesus into our idol, our hero, the greatest. And yet, whenever the disciples started to talk about who is the greatest, Jesus would rein them in. Jesus would draw them back and say, if you want to be first in my kingdom, you have to be like a child. You have to be a servant. You have to put your needs below the needs of others. That's the Jesus that we are going to get to know in these next few weeks in this study. Our study is Why Jesus? And the first answer we give is for forgiveness, which falls perfectly in line with the Lenten season where we're beginning this study for the first time. In fact, this week is Ash Wednesday for many of us. It's a time when we think about the ways that we fall short, the ways that we aren't perfect. And in order to find that forgiveness that Jesus offers, we need to admit that we aren't perfect, that we sin. And the good news is that Jesus loved hanging out with sinners, people who realized that they weren't perfect. In fact, sinners loved hanging out with Jesus too. He didn't make them feel as though he was judging them. Rather, he made them feel loved and respected. He didn't make them feel rejected. He gave them hope. In fact, maybe one of the reasons that Jesus didn't offer that rejection to others is that he himself was rejected so often in his life. He was run out of his hometown. We find out in the New Testament readings that when he came to his hometown, they didn't understand him. They didn't understand how a hometown boy could be doing these things. They ran him out of town. One time when he was in his ministry, his family came to collect him because they thought he was crazy. And we know at the end of his life that he was betrayed by the people that he loved the most. Many times as he leads up to those last weeks, he warns his disciples, we're going to Jerusalem. When we get there, I'm going to be betrayed. I'm going to be killed. And I'm going to rise again. And the disciples were hard-pressed to let go of that image of perfection, that image of a great leader, and to discover this new kind of leader that Jesus was telling them very clearly that he was. Jesus was rejected, and he invites his followers to move beyond rejection into his kingdom. Jesus was broken by spears, by the cross, and he invites us to move past this ideal of perfection and to be broken alongside of him. It's in our brokenness that Jesus reaches us with forgiveness and love. We find the love of Jesus. We find hope as we admit to being broken people. As we admit to sin, we move past rejection and into grace and forgiveness. Why Jesus? So that we can experience and give forgiveness.